Sounds like Washington's getting some more upgrades in the secondary.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's the site editor with Inside the Huskies with Athlon Sports. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So, Lars, we're going to give the everydayers a little bit of a story time here to start off, because it sounds like, according to Matt Zemetz, Pete Nakos, all the 247 on 3, all the national people, that Washington is expected to add, as we are recording this a little before 3:00 on Thursday, expected to add Sacramento State safety Cameron Broussard, who is all Big Sky first team last season, really talented player. We're going to get into that. We were, hoping to talk about this a little bit more on the Thursday show. As there were some cryptic gifts tweeted out by Washington's coaching staff, which meant a commit was on the way, and it was never publicly announced. So we're rolling with this as under the assumption that he could end up transferring to Washington. And we're just going to talk about what that depth looks like and what he would bring to the room. So what's the first thing that you noticed with Cam Broussard when you looked at his film?
In terms of making plays and just overall, always the one thing, well, let me start here. The one thing that Vinny Cincinnati and Steve Belichick said, and this is an obvious statement here, but you have to be able to tackle the one. If you could pick one box that he checks, does not miss tackles, doesn't take a bad angle, doesn't take a bad read, always seems to be around the ball, but he's not just a hard hitter. And I think that's worth emphasizing at 6'3", 200 pounds. He also has some ball skills. This isn't a guy that's just going to come down and lay the lumber. He has the ability to play a number of different positions along or across the defense. If you look at his PFF breakdown, I believe he had over 120 snaps each season at box, free safety, and nickel. So that tells me there's a lot of different things. So that tells me there's a lot of different ways you can use him. And there's also an experienced body. So to me, that's what you're getting potentially with him if you were to come to Washington. Again, just going to try and caveat this as much as we can. If Washington were to add him, that's the type of player you're adding, a guy that's going to bring instant impact, not necessarily have to be coached a ton, because he obviously could get better. Every player can get better, but it just seems like a guy that really can play anywhere in this defensive scheme.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things that intrigued me the most, is because it's not just him. Where Washington has also added Oklahoma safety Justin Harrington over the course of the offseason, who's a similar body, a little bit bigger. He's 6'3", 220, where Broussard's 6'3", 200. And he's somebody where I like Broussard best at that free safety sort of spot, where you can still walk him down. You can still play him in the box, because Harrington was playing that nickel role, where they called it the cheetah at Oklahoma, or it's still the husky here at Washington, or it's the same position effectively, but just terminology. But I liked Harrington a little bit more in that role, where he's a little bit more physical at the line of scrimmage, just kind of at that point of attack, where that's something that we both know that Steve Belichick really loves. And, Jordan Shaw is still certainly going to be a big part of the defense, where I think it'll be a battle in fall camp to see who starts between the two of those guys. But adding Broussard just adds the depth that you're looking for in the back end. Because one thing that you and I have discussed over the course of spring practice is, because Peyton Waters is somebody who really impressed us, but there are 4 freshman safeties that are coming in this season. When you include Waters, with Raheem Wright, with Rashawn Clark, and with Paul Menke, that there's a lot of inexperience there. We know Jed Fish is not afraid to play those guys, but you also want to make sure that you have a little bit of that experience in front of them, where Tristan Dunn is somebody who'll still play a role. I feel that McElestine and Cam Broussard are going to end up, again, assuming this all does come to fruition, are going to end up battling for the starting spot. And, one of the things that I feel we should note about Broussard is, this was a big time battle for him, where it was Washington versus Michigan for his services.
And that's exactly why you want to go and get all those reassurances as possible, because when you're looking at other schools that are competing for some of these guys, and initially you think, oh, wow, another Big Sky guy, another lower level FCS guy. There's a reason why colleges are going into the portal and finding those veteran guys, because whether you played at the FCS or FBS level, it's really that experience and depth that schools are looking for that want to compete for the CFP. In order to have solid depth, I mean, because again, you can play freshmen, you can do that, but more often than not, there's a lot of learning curve that comes to playing really any position in the secondary, but especially at the safety and the Husky position, so you can get your feet wet. But in order, this really tells me that Jedd Fisch and this entire coaching staff are really committed to winning the season. And that's not necessarily a surprise, but it is worth acknowledging because this is somewhat of a retooling, reloading year. And part of that reload means, hey, you need to have some guys in the secondary that can come in if somebody gets hurt. Where Justin Harrington got hurt last year, we don't root for injuries. But it would be foolish of the coaching staff to just say, okay, we got Harrington, we're good. We got 4 freshmen. If somebody gets hurt or needs to emerge or whatever, so be it. That's how you build a good defense, is you put all the talent in the room. And if Wright and Clark and Menke don't end up playing this year and redshirting, okay, cool. They still have 4 years left. And all these guys that are coming in this year are 1 or 2 year rentals, hitmen, whatever you want to call them, where they're just coming in to really bring along the veterans. And that's something Vinny Sunseri emphasized to us in the spring.
Absolutely. And that's such an important part of this too, where, I feel we should talk a little bit more about Broussard's credentials, where he's all Big Sky first team this last season. He was second on the team in tackles, has 4 picks to his name, has 17 career passes defensed, a couple of forced fumbles, where this is a really productive player too, where it's not like they're just going out and taking a body to take a body, where it's not, I don't believe that, most of these guys are that, where the offensive line, there's certainly a level of, we need to get some depth in the room there. But again, those guys are still going to compete for spots. And one of the things that I really do like about this take is the fact that he adds such a different level of experience, where I really like McEllisteen, but I'm not somebody who right now thinks that he's going to be a huge piece of run defense, where that's something that Cameron Broussard can do really well. I love McEllisteen when he's just dropping back and, playing center field at single high and a cover 3, whatever it is you want to call it. But when you need somebody who's going to walk down in the box, Cam Fabiculon is going to do that really well. But if you want 2 guys in the back end who's going to do that, Cam Broussard is going to that second body on the back end. And then when you add in a Justin Harrington at nickel, all of a sudden that's a really, really good run defense where, the bodies on the defensive line, some of them are certainly untested. When you look at just some of the guys that are going to be in the rotation, a Bryce Butler, a Linneas Davis, Armand Parker, where they haven't taken a whole lot of snaps, or in their case, any snaps at the college level, but having guys behind them that can clean that up, that are solid, experienced run defenders at any level, is a really, really good thing to have. And that's what all 3 of those guys can do.
Exactly. And that's the one thing that we keep emphasizing. It's competitions. But the one thing the coaches emphasize is you'd rather have, and that's really when you look at across the defense, kind of the approach they're taking, where whether you talk about edge, you mentioned the D line, where you bring in a Deshaun Lynch, similar from Sacramento State, where you're adding all these bodies together, because there's not necessarily, even a credit to Zach Durfee, there's not one true guy that you can point to along this defensive line and say, that's the anchor, that's the leader. Now, we would both say Zach Durfee, Javon Parker, Voight Sanufi for third team in that regard, in terms of veteran experience, guys that have played at Washington, but none of them truly have that lockdown starting experience. And so in that situation, you need to have as many potential bodies that can do a number of different, that also can do a number of different things. And I think that's the good thing about all of these additions, and the reason most of these, and in the case of Brasard, you're absolutely right, where he probably plays more as that second safety role, but he can, and saying less so the nickel, with Justin Harrington playing that spot. But either way, they're interchangeable, and it allows versatility. So when you go play different teams in the Big Ten, where you have Iowa, who's more physical, and you have Ohio State, who's more spread out, you can combat both of those, and you have a roster where instead of taking one player at 3 different spots that can, each player at 3 different spots that can do one thing, you take a guy that can do 3 different things, and that's only one scholarship, but yet you can have him be multiple things, and that's how you make the roster build out.
And that's also just a credit to, Steve Belichick and what he wants to see from guys in the secondary, which is also big. And Lars, let's stay in the secondary here, because Dijon Lee has officially cut his list to 4. And we'll get there right after a message from our good friends over at Game Time, because I love the NBA playoffs, and it's so great that you can now buy tickets for them on Game Time, because Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets tip-off, and I know I've talked about it before, but I wish I could go to a Celtics game, and really, really wish I could go to a Sonics game, which would be so cool to do that on the Game Time app. And hey, maybe we'll be able to do a Sonics game, and in the near future here. That'd be fantastic. There's so many different cool things that you can do on the Game Time app, like their last minute deals where you can save up to 60% off buying a last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. You get zone deals where you can save even more when you choose a section to let Game Time choose the seats, and their lowest price guarantee, where Game Time will credit you with 110% of the difference. You can find a lower price somewhere else. You can take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. So Lars, one thing I feel you and I have both done a whole lot of when writing on our respective websites, with you with Inside the Huskies and me with Huskies Wire, is there are a lot of guys that we will call top targets or priority targets, because there are a lot of guys that, Jed Fisch has done a really good job of establishing relationships with, and the entire coaching staff, that are really, really high on the board. But I feel that, top target sometimes needs to be reserved for the number one player at a position. And I don't think Dijon Lee is the number one player just at his position. I think he's the number one player on Washington's board overall. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody, but this is something where Washington has done such a good job of staying in the race despite the coaching change, where John Richardson did a fantastic job recruiting him at Arizona and being able to continue that relationship with Washington, a school that he was already very high on with Kalen DeBoer and Courtney Morgan before that pair left for Alabama. It's really cool to see Washington be able to stay in the race this long. And I don't mean that as a participation trophy, like, oh, he's certainly going to Bama or he's certainly going to Georgia. I don't think he's going to A&M, but that's a different discussion for a different day. But when we look at that and just see what his top four is, seeing Washington still in the race is a really, really nice credit to what this coaching staff has done to this point. And now it's time to close on not just him, but a whole bunch of other guys as well.
Exactly. And it's one thing, to me, it's not a surprise because of as you mentioned, the interest that he had with John Richardson. And this is exactly what we talk about, where Jedd Fisch could get some of these guys and did to a degree at some, like with McMillan, and I guess Faatui was a 3-star, but so McMillan was kind of his big get at Arizona. Dijon Lee could have been that, but I don't think he ever would have truly been able to close on him because he doesn't have the resources that Washington has. And I think that's exactly why, as you mentioned, having a Steve Belichick and the other resources with Vinny Cincinnati, all of these resources that are at the disposal of Jedd Fisch and his coaching staff. That's
and we're going to get into one later too. Sorry, just a little tease for later.
No, exactly. No, you're absolutely right. But with that being said, that's why you go and get Jedd Fisch, because he's able to get some of these guys. And then to me, and this is what we said off the show, where when you start to look at this list, yes, as you mentioned, he had the interest in Arizona. Arizona is obviously no longer on the list. Washington was on his list previously, but I think he honestly had a better relationship and trusted his position coaches at Arizona more in terms of John Richardson than he did with the prior staff at Washington. And that's not a side of Kalen DeBoer or, Courtney Morgan, who I know was also recruiting him as well. But when you just look at the coaching comparisons, to me, that's the one I think that really is carrying weight for Washington, because Dijon Lee has known John Richardson, I believe, since he was a freshman or sophomore. That was one of those. And Armand Hawkins also probably should get some credit here, because I know he does a lot of work with Southern California recruits. All those guys have these long 3, 4, 5-year relationships with some of these kids. And you start looking at these other schools, Washington was more or less a byproduct of just kind of being on the West Coast, being in a good situation. But I never necessarily felt he had as strong a ties to the previous coaching staff. So with this staff, I think they're in a perfect position to close. It's not going to be easy with Georgia, because I think when you look at what his 4 schools are, it's Washington to stay on the West Coast and play for a great coach and with a great cornerbacks coach, and potentially lay that foundation for a national championship at Washington again in a couple of years. Or do I just join a almost already made national championship powerhouse in Georgia and one that's trying to reemerge in Alabama. And then, as you mentioned,
Sure.
Texas A&M gets the participation trophy. But with that being said, it's to me, that's kind of how I view this situation. And for Washington, yes, it's, as I said on Twitter, it's a massive statement for Jed Fisch and John Richardson to get to this point. But you don't really want to bank on, oh, wow, okay, he goes to Georgia. Maybe we can get him a couple years in the portal. Well, you might, but you better just at that point, it's like, just do whatever you can to get him now.
Right. And it's something where we've talked a lot about his talent. We know that he's somebody who, if he were to commit to Washington, could find a way to come in and start in 2025 because he's just that good. He is. But this is, I feel that like there are going to be a lot of different things that in different minute ways will define the class of 2025 and define Jedd Fisch's just first year at Washington in terms of one of the first goals he set was saying this is going to be the best class in school history, where he's not shy about setting lofty goals. We both know that. We both heard him speak enough and spoken to him enough where we know that that's something that he wants to do. I respect that. I really do. But it's also like, I don't mean this to sound harsh, but it's just the reality of the situation. I know it's a cliche, but it's put up or shut up time, where I truly do have a lot of faith in this staff being able to close the top 20 class with all the guys that they're in on, with all the guys that are coming up on visits. I truly do believe that they're going to be able to close a good number of those guys. And we've got some fantastic questions for our Monday mailbag, which for all the everydayers, make sure you stay tuned in on Monday for that, where we're going to certainly hit on recruiting for a decent amount of that. But Dijon Lee is going to define what Jedd Fisch's recruiting is going to look like in his first year. Where are you just a hat on the table, or is this a truly serious contender? And I believe it's the latter. I really do. Where are you going to be able to close him? That's a whole different situation. That's going to be very, very tough. But again, I want to say that I do think that this staff can do that, and it's going to set the table for a whole lot of other guys where I don't think he's going to be the first guy to commit. Let's be real about that. Or there are going to be a whole lot of other guys that are going to do that before then. But if you can find a way to do that, and then all of a sudden, oh, Darius Dixon wants to follow. Oh, Adonis Curry wants to follow. Oh, LaDarian Clarity's still sitting out there. He hasn't committed. All of a sudden, you're looking at arguably the best defensive back class in the country, where he can set that up. He can be that kind of guy. And I know I'm making these big, bold statements, but they're all within the range of possibilities. Where, Lars, you said this off the air, where he was able to go collect, and you just said it on the air too, where he was able to go collect all these really good pieces in Arizona. And now with all the resources that he has at Washington, he can certainly continue to do that. And then, you look around the rest of the class, which we're going to dive more into in another show, where you look at, can he pull a CJ May out of Alabama, which would be a big win? Can he get Douglas Utu? Can he get Chantel Lele? Can he get an Andrew Marsh or a Chris Lawson or a Phillip Bell to add to that? Like Caleb Edwards is another one that I'm really high on, where if you start looking around the class and you can all kind of point to Dijon Lee, where if Dijon Lee at any point just says, yeah, Washington is going to be the place for me for X, Y, and Z reason, I feel that it's going to just have the most important, biggest ripple effect that you could possibly see in the rest of this class.
No doubt. And the other thing to consider, he does also have a 4-star teammate at wide receiver who's also going to be on campus for that same weekend.
Yep.
So when you think about the potential that Washington could have, it's a perfect setup for them, where if they both say, hey, you know what? Washington needs another receiver or two, and Phillip, you down? Yeah, I'm down. Let's just stay on the West Coast and win a national championship, because one of my other schools, last year, Kalen DeBoer proved he could do it at Washington's. And I like Jedd Fisch, and I have a great relationship with his coaching staff. Why not? And I know it sounds crazy, right, to think, wow, could Washington actually beat Georgia in a potential head-to-head for a 5-star recruit? I wouldn't be surprised. Now, again, would I also not be surprised if he goes to Georgia? Absolutely not. Like,
no,
Georgia
is
is what we would call the betting favorite, just based on everything. Everything
track
right there.
record,
Georgia,
everything else, sure.
Right. They're probably like a 190 favorite, maybe a 180, 150
Something
favorite.
Like that, sure.
Well, it's not a home run guarantee, but they certainly have the leader in the clubhouse. But Washington is right there. I wouldn't put, and again, these are all unofficial odds, not sponsored by anybody, but I put that right at 190, maybe 200. And then, you're talking the other ones, 250, 300, a little bit further out. I just think when you look at the room that Washington has coming in, because Apicius Price potentially goes to the NFL next year, and then at that point, there's a lot of young talent in the room. Don't get me wrong. But why not get a 5-star to be the ringleader of that group and say, you know what, all of us guys on the West Coast and Curly Reed from Louisiana, let's do this thing.
Sure, absolutely. And that's one of the things where I feel like we just set the bar very, very high. But that's what this coaching staff has done. And that's a good thing. But now it's up to them to live up to that same expectation. And one of the reasons that I feel that we can talk about this in such this, this pie in the sky sort of light is because not only have they, gone out and shown, hey, we're going to develop all these relationships. We're going to get an early commitment from Raiden Vinesbright, who's a really, really talented player that is getting a whole bunch of offers, is supposed to take all these official visits. No, he's going to move it up a month and a half, come to Washington and commit on the spot. That was really impressive. I like that a lot. Dash Beerley is somebody that they found early on and was able to do the same exact thing, got a commitment out of him, before he really blew up in a national sense. And now it's just time to continue. And, it's credit to all those guys where, Raiden Vinesbright is commenting on all these posts. Dash Beerley is doing the same thing. Jake Flores, where all the guys that are already in the boat are helping out and trying to build what this is going to be. But again, now it's time to close, and that's the most important part of all of this. And Lars, speaking of the recruiting staff, they got a very interesting new member. And we'll get there right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel, because it's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL. And FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. And, I have to do this. I have to give a shout out to Jason Tatum, where, I bet on him to win Eastern Conference Finals MVP and everything like that. First player since LeBron James to lead his team for an entire series in points, rebounds, assists, steals, blocks. Oh, he had such a wonderful series against the Cavs. I know they were hurt, but I'm still riding with the Celtics all the way through all this. It was awesome to see all that. So Lars, I mean this in the nice possible way. I was really surprised to see the announcement for Faatui Tuitele that we did, because I just, to be fair, I just didn't know what his next move was. And I'm really excited to see this, where Faatui Tuitele, former four-star defensive tackle who played with Washington from 2019 to 2023, announced that he's going to be joining the recruiting staff. And this is a really awesome move on so many different levels.
Yeah. I mean, think about when he committed to Washington out of St. Louis, Hawaii. Yeah. Very clear for people, because that just be very clear. And you say St. Louis, you immediately would think Busch Stadium and Missouri, but no, that was a massive win for Chris Peterson at the time, because when you looked at the other schools that he had, I off the top of my head, I can't think of a ton. I know Oregon,
Alabama, Texas, Ohio State, and Georgia. I believe was his top 5.
Exactly, yeah. But I know other schools even beyond that Washington's like, hey, whoa, we got him over here. It's like, yeah. So that was a guy that when he committed, that was one of those massive Chris Peterson wins, similar to what we expect now from Jedd Fisch. And getting a guy like that from the islands who stayed all 5 years and ended up unfortunately having to basically medically retire after basically what was it, 2 days after the national championship. Like, hey, can't keep my career going. Thank you for the ride. But now in a cool way, he actually gets to continue that career by bringing on new players and bringing in new players from Hawaii. And we've seen Jedd Fisch go to the island a lot. I mean, Tristan McMillan. Yeah, yep, exactly. And there's they got the safety coming in, Aiden
Manitai, yeah.
Manitai. There's a couple of other guys even in the 26 class and on down the road that they've been looking at. So getting a former player, this is almost like a Justin Glenn hire. And this is no slight to Glenn, but with that Poly connection just might be different. Like Justin was had that really
Justin's very good at his job. Yeah, we love Justin.
Right. So this is not a apples to apples comparison, but I do think it's in that similar mold where you get a former player who didn't end up going to the NFL, but really is passionate about the University of Washington, and those people are invaluable. I think Will Conroy, to an example, where I know he became an assistant coach, not necessarily what Tuitele might want to do, but again, there's nothing that can prevent Tuitele from becoming a grad assistant coach a couple of years. But and it speaks to the value of the program. So when Jedd Fisch goes and says, hey, you know what, the Washington brand I am now carrying on from Kalen and Jimmy and Peterson and way back Don James, everybody comes back. And I think that's the one thing Jedd needs to get credit for is he's brought Marcus Peters back. You got Vita and Danny back.
in fairness, Marcus Peters did come back last year as well, but it felt a little bit different. But Lars, I'm sorry to cut you off, because there was one thing that you mentioned that was like the first thing that popped into my head when I said all this, and it was the first thing you said. It's just the status of what he was as a recruit when he committed to Washington, and who all his finalists were. And the first thing that I thought of when I saw that was he knows what it takes to sell Washington to some of the best players in the country, which I think is something that cannot be understated. Because he was in that position 5 years ago, where he said, all right, I have Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, Texas, and Washington. And, the national perspective is, it'll be Alabama or Ohio State or Georgia. And he picks Washington. And for all the reasons that, some of them, he's certainly, divulged to us over the years in press conferences and things like that. But there are certainly some that were special to him. And he knows what players in his shoes are going to be valuing. And on top of that, as you said, recruiting Hawaii is such an important part of success at the University of Washington. Recruiting it well, getting Treston Keeney McMillan is a good part, but getting back to getting the number one, the number two player in just Hawaii just sets up a different sort of Polynesian culture on the West Coast, where when I think of the 2019 class, which our buddy Mike Farrell had a nice shout out to it a couple of weeks ago on Twitter, and it's something that, it's Stuart Mandel, there have been a whole bunch of people that wrote about that class, that had Puka, that had Trent McDuffie, that had Kyler Gordon, that had Faatui Tuitele, that had all these guys in there. And Faatui, of course, is part of that as well, where when they all came together for their official visit to close Faatui Tuitele, it was all the other Polynesian guys because of just the culture that they have together. And that's something that, you cannot underemphasize. You always have to make sure that that's something that's really, really important to just selling. And it's something that he understands as well as anybody.
Yeah, that 2019 class was special. People don't understand like what could have been if a couple of things didn't go a certain way. And that's not even just pointing at one person, that's pointing at about 3 or 4 people. But either way, it gets back to the Washington brand. And I think not only just for selling, Hawaii recruits, but just Polynesians in general, right? Where you think about Douglas Utu, a guy that, that clearly has some Polynesian connection, and you look at just a number of guys even on the West Coast. And honestly, to a degree, you could go East Coast and say, if you have guys out there that Faatui can say, hey, you know what? I came from Hawaii to Washington. I made that long journey. I hadn't really known anything, about them before I came out there. And there's a number of guys like that. Having guys that can share personal experiences. I remember Julius Erving when he picked Washington over Alabama and USC and a similar roster, right? Or a similar list of schools way back when. Justin Glenn was one that basically just took him and his dad Leroy around and really just not convinced them, but kind of just opened the eyes that, hey, this is what it's like to be a student athlete. Why? I can speak on it. I know exactly what that's like. I know I walked these halls. I made the trek. And by the way, I turned down big schools to do it. Now some people can't always say that. And so getting those guys, it's why when you look at Ohio State, when they bring back, James Laurinaitis, Brian Hartline, now granted, those are position coaches, but when you bring back former players to your program that know how to properly sell your institution, especially for a coach like Jed, who has 0 ties to the university prior to coming over here, it's a massive sell.
So one other part of that as well, where it's something where, we talked about Kyler Gordon. We can talk about some of the other in-state guys. I feel that it's a whole different conversation when, it's Tuitele being somebody from Hawaii, or when it's somebody from California, or just somebody who's not from the state of Washington, who comes to the school and falls in love with it. Just says, yes, this is somewhere I want to be. This is where I want to devote my time. This is just where I wanted to devote my energy. And that's something that also is just really important and really cool to see from what Faatui wanted to do. Reading his exit interview with Christian Capel, our good buddy over at On Montlake, was really special, where, obviously you feel bad where you just talk about all the talent that he had and all the time he missed due to injuries, but you could also just see very clearly how much he cares about the university and how much he loves it and how much he just wants to be a part of all of that. So getting this opportunity and having him just continue to work for the school and sell the program and do what it is that, he loves is just awesome.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where you can't. It's an invaluable piece, and I know we keep using that word a lot, but when you think about all these we spent basically 2 whole segments, this entire show, talking about recruiting in various ways, whether it's a transfer or whether it's a guy from high school, there are certain people that you can bring into your program and you can hire like a Steve Belichick, and you can do all those great things. But in order to truly bring all the talent that you need to at Washington, in order for Steve Belichick to have that success, he's going to need some guys from outside the area, then outside his normal reach, to be able to sell. And that's why you have to pair them together. You can't just have one or the other. Much like you wouldn't go, and this is no offense to Tuitele, but it's like you wouldn't go hire him as a defensive line coach right away. Right? You work him into a GA and work him up.
Yeah,
think Jared
work up the ladder. Yeah.
Well, and think Jared Alexander when he came in as a GA. There's all these type of guys where you can bring in certain type of people, but when you have somebody who just recently went to a national championship and can walk around with a Pac-12 championship ring on his finger, or actually a couple, I believe, on his fingers, you can say, you know what? This is cool because you're not selling me on something you did back 20 years ago when I coached it, played at Washington or whatever. Yeah. Which is no disrespect to those players.
No,
but especially this modern age of college football, the more recent you can have guys come back to your program and be around it, along with those older guys like Danny Shelton, Vita, Shaq Thompson, Jake Locker, et cetera. That is the perfect blend to have, and that's how you build a strong program.
Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all the everydayers for tuning in. We really do appreciate your constant support. It does mean so much to us. We really appreciate just everybody who's stuck with us through this entire time. And make sure you stay tuned and hit that subscribe button because we have so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the offseason. And to do that, just subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating the channel, do content every single day. So make sure you like the video. Click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new video. If you got any questions, comments, concerns, anything like that, drop them right down below in the comments. And if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review, as it all really does help us out. Thank you so much for tuning in. And we'll talk to you on Monday.